Hello, welcome to Jadekind Gaming. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to semi-brief overview, a topic I was actually asked about, I think last year. I did how to play D&D. And someone asked, hey, can you go over sort of how to create and run a campaign? Which I've done, and I do that frequently. And it's a very broad topic, and I was very much like, what do you mean? Because that can cover a lot of things. And eventually I'm just sort of like, you know what, let's just go over an overview, a few ideas. If you have questions, subjects you'd like me to go more in detail with, either that I cover briefly here, or if you just, if I don't cover something, and you're like, what about this aspect of running a game or whatever? You can just ask. The comments, when I get a handful of them or whatever, eventually I'll do like a follow-up video or more than one follow-up video if needed. But I figured, good to at least start with something. So, here's sort of almost like starting with, almost like going through I sort of designed like an outline kind of going through an order. And the first thing you gotta do is decide on the game you want to run. And feel free to ask your players, if you need suggestions, or if they have them, like if there's just something they're biting at the bit to play, ask. And that can, of course be, what kind of game. But it can also just be like, what, like is there a gimmick or something? You don't have to have a gimmick. You can just do sort of generic fantasy game. In fact, if you're running your first game and you're comfortable with that, go ahead with that. I tend to have gimmicks. I have ran a lot of games. And I like for there to be something new and interesting. It keeps me from getting burnt out with them. It keeps them interesting for me. And I decided on this subject. I was actually going to go over just the campaigns that I have done or about to do, have started but haven't finished editing and started uploading it, games on this channel. I've done a lot of more games and can go into a lot more, but I figured let's just, I can give ideas here and examples just with what I went through and I've uploaded to the channel as my actual play videos. The first of which was the Mission of Good campaign. And that was pretty much standard fantasy. It was, I think, the second game that I ran with 5th edition. Still set in the First World. I was actually, I was still running my first game when I started that one, and I kind of ran them simultaneously. And they were I had a giant map, and they were in different parts of that map, and they were simultaneous games. And it was fantasy basically with the idea of everything in the player's handbook was on that, was available there, and things that were coming out in the Unearthed Arcana and that kind of thing were in other outside islands. If they wanted to bring it in, I would find a way for them to bring it in. It was just sort of set up like it's available. It exists. We can do it, but for the most part, fantasy. And that was just because, I was still new to 5th edition, and with the new edition, new rules, that was enough to just be exciting, and I just wanted to figure it out. And so I wasn't doing anything fancy to change things. After that, I did the Young Monks game. That was very gimmicky. For one, technically, with that game, I told my players, I think it was pick a race or class, and you're all going to be the same. And they chose monks, and that's where that came from. Because I started with whatever game I'm going to do is going to have that as a gimmick. You're all going to be the same as something. And so they were all monks. And not only that, but that was gimmicky in that I ran it very constructed. There was, the player's choice was minimal. It was. They could choose to or not to do something, but basically every session, they were going to run into an encounter. I came up with ways for this monster to come up. If they went a different direction, it was going to find them somewhere else. There was from session 1. Each session had a monster or group of monsters they would fight, and each session they would gain a level, or the last session or penultimate session they gained a few to prepare them for the boss. But basically, it was like a very constructed from the beginning. Here's how this game is working. But it was just sort of playing around with some things. It's like I would hate, and I'm sure my parents would hate to always play that kind of game. I would hate to always be running a game like that. But I wanted to play with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Especially because with that constructed thing, I think, 10 sessions or something? However many sessions it was that number of sessions from the beginning. There wasn't going to be more. It was a limited game. It was a limited time. And, whatever, we played with it. Then I did Into the Fire, which is actually a Star Wars Edge of the Empire game. That was a completely different system. And that I find very helpful. To just run a completely different game. I love Dungeons & Dragons. I do. I loved 3.5. Pathfinder was great. I loved 5th edition. 4th edition wasn't terrible. It was a very different game, and I was amongst the camp when it came out, replaced 3.5. I had my torch and my pitchfork. I now actually have a decent collection of books that I've gotten since 5th edition came out. I've gotten them all used, and for one, they look beautiful on the shelf. Those were some beautiful looking books. But also, it's not a bad game. It was just a game, and I've only played it 2 or 3 times, shorter campaigns. But it was just a different game. It upset me that this was replacing Dungeons & Dragons. But now that it's no longer replacing what I love of Dungeons & Dragons, it's a great alternate game. Just like Star Wars is, or GURPS is fun, or now, even just going back to Pathfinder or 3.5, I enjoyed Numenera. I like the setting for Vampire the Masquerade, even if the system isn't great. I play, D20 Modern, back with 3rd edition 3.5 was fun. I collect role-playing games at this point. But I started doing it because I realized I enjoy taking a break from D&D for a game and just playing something else every so often. It's fun. It really gives me a chance to, recharge my batteries and try something different. So yeah, running Star Wars. Yeah, that in and of itself, I didn't have to do gimmicky Star Wars because it's been a good number of years since I've ran Star Wars, which I have, with multiple different systems. But yeah, that's one of the ones that I'll go back to every so often. Worlds Collide. It was gimmicky in that each player was from another world. They each came from, basically one of them was from a different fantasy setting. But then I had a guy from like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi world and one from a modern world where he was a superhero. Yeah, those were different. And not only were the players that gimmicky, but I did my cool, I'd make a map thing, like I like to do, and I usually do. That world had a faction system. Basically, I did what my friends always called the Pokemon chart, where I had each faction and how they felt about the other factions all charted out, so that I could sort of kind of get the feel for the way people would interact with one group would interact with another. It was kind of designed with the idea that the players were going to ally themselves with one or two of the factions, and it was going to help me with that. And they didn't. They very distinctly decided, we like this faction over here and kind of this one. None of them do we want to be a part of. We're going to be our own group, and fine. It was fun. But sort of almost if I'd have planned that ahead of time, I would have probably left a blank line and started sort of feeling out, how do the factions feel about you? I would have encouraged them to name themselves, and by the end they kind of did, but it was very much that was a gimmick because that was me focusing on the factions, and there was also gimmicky in that I had the deities gone from that world. That's, something that, because a lot of the different fantasy worlds, I'll come up with my own deity lists, and that's a bit of a gimmick, because it'll be different each time. But then I ran The Banished. That was different. Now, I was still using Dungeons & Dragons, but that was set in modern-ish Earth. And, I mean, all fantasy creatures were coming in as the things that they were fighting, but my players were people from Earth. They were fighting with guns. They drove around in a truck. So that was the gimmick there, is I was running a modern game. And it was fun. And then the game that I've just started and will shortly be coming out is Underland. It's set in an Underdark campaign, which is actually something I've never done. I don't think in any edition of D&D. Which means also there's and the reason I wanted to do it is because I was looking through the monster manual, I'm I haven't gotten to use any of these monsters, and I'm starting to have some cool ideas for how I could use these. How do I fit them all into one game? And the most logical explanation was, well, I can make sense for all of them to be in the Underdark. Let's do an Underdark campaign, and I'm loving it. It's so much fun. So yeah, that'll be coming out soon. I mean, and we're still pretty early on in that one, but it's fun. But the thing is, each of these, other than basically the learning the system, has got a gimmick. And I continue to do that because it keeps it interesting for me. My job is to make it interesting for the players. But I gotta make decisions that are gonna keep it interesting for me, because I am our primary game master, and I am because I love to be so. I love that job. And I take a lot of responsibility in that job, because my job is to make sure they have fun. And then, once you've decided sort of what your game's going to be, do some world building. And have fun doing it. That may look different for you than it does for me. What I think you should prepare is basically enough detail for you to get an idea of what the world is like, how things work. You're going to need that. That's really just a bit of... That could be take a sheet of notebook paper and write some notes. And just some interesting things, that kind of... Whatever. For me, it often involves creating a map. I love making a map. A map is fun for me. But if drawing or painting or making a 3D representation with cardboard, glue, and paper towels is not fun for you, then don't do that. And I often build, or at times, like this most recent game, select pre-existing lists of pantheons of deities. Like I said, the game where the deities were gone was a gimmick for me, because that'll be something, because not only do you kind of need deities for what if you want to be ready for a cleric or a paladin, you're going to need those. But it can also help just reflect the people in the world. What's important to them is what they worship. Right? Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that's definitely I often involved with it. Although, again, if that's not fun for you, well, you don't need that part. If you get a cleric, you can tell the cleric, you tell me what your deity is. That's you can literally leave that up to the cleric. Or the cleric you could just let them be like, well, I like the idea of nature, and that's why I'm choosing the nature domain, and it could be just a conceptual thing, and you don't even have to have a specific deity. I like to bring details in about it, and quirks. But again, do the world building that's fun for you. I can come up with, of course, there are times, brief notes on factions, cities, nations within the world, just little details about them. And whatever else is needed to define this game compared to any other game or world that I've ran. Or especially like the last one or two that I've ran. Coming into an Underdark one, it's pretty easy. I was like, okay, we're going back to actual fantasy world. Because the last couple of games before that I ran were either modern or had people from modern and sci-fi times in them. So it was very much we're going back to a normal fantasy world. But I mean, moving forward from here, it's just sort of, you want to kind of define things based on what the players have had, where their headspace is. So if you're starting a new game, you're not in a vacuum. Your players also remember the game you just ran. You can contrast it from that. Unlike the last game, this is the case. Make some changes. Or don't. You can play in the same world over and over again. I got a couple of those. And I got a couple worlds that I played in once, and I'm like, I have my notes all tucked away. I'm like, I think I want to go back there. I want to wait a few years, but I want to go back there. And so I have all my notes saved. But it's whatever's fun for you. And you can. There are people that build a world for their D&D games, and they just keep building on that. If you don't like to build a world of your own, you still need world building. But if you don't want to do it, grab yourself a book. Yeah, the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. If I didn't want to build my own world, I could take this, and it has the Sword Coast and Faerun and all sorts of details on all the areas of that region. About deities. All the stuff I need is already pre-made here. I just have to read it and decide if I want to change things. And even if you don't, tell your players you might. So they can't just read it and they don't just know everything. Because that's the biggest thing for me, is I never want my players to know more about my world than I do. But as long as you tell them, things could be different here. That way, if you skip the chapter and they read it, they can't be like, but the book says, I was like, oh yeah, I changed that part. But your world building can largely be just reading about a pre-built world. That works too. Just kind of know the world, know what's going on, so that as your players are creating characters, you know what they're creating characters for. And then make the decisions you need to actually let the players create their characters. What races, classes, etc. are allowed? Is it just what's in the core book? Is it the core book and maybe one or two of the other books that have come out for 5th edition? Or whatever game? Is it a specific list? Does your world not have dwarves and they can't play dwarves? Know that beforehand. Don't start character creation and as they're growing up, be like, what you making? I'm doing this cool dwarven wizard. Oh no dwarves. Tell them first. Because once they get their heart set on something, it feels like you're being mean to them to tear it away from them. But if you tell them from the start, there aren't dwarves. The dwarves mysteriously vanished 30 years ago. Then all of a sudden that's an interesting. I am a gnome wizard who is a historian on dwarven, history and trying to figure out where they went. All of a sudden they have a cool character, but it's only because they knew in advance. Otherwise, I wanted to be a dwarf. Let them know from the start. If things aren't available, let them know. And how are stats going to be generated? Are you just going to do the standard, 46 dropping the lowest? Are you going to give them multiple sets to choose from? Going to do point buy or an array or something stranger? I've done stranger. I've done really strange. I've done random draw a card that aligns to this generation of stats and had it where they're all mixed and they're not balanced and and you get some weird stuff with that. But yeah, there are stranger methods available, which can be fun if you're just wanting to do, do you want to draw attention to that or not? But yeah, you gotta know what to tell them when they're like, well, how do I come up with my stats? What are those? Those are important to me. What level is the characters you're gonna start at? I enjoy starting at level 1. I enjoy having my players start at level 1. It's easy for me to feel them out before I have to come up with powerful things. I can just use some of the standard weak monsters and figure out what they can do, what they can take. It's especially useful for new players. Start at level 1. If you have new players, level 1. Because each level, they get more powers. You want them to get used to the powers they have before they get new ones. But some players, especially more experienced players, like to, at least occasionally, start at level 5 or 10. Start a level 18 game. You're already epic adventurers. And you're going into this deadly mountain that spits forth demons every full moon, and you're trying to find the source and stop it as it terrorizes the land. Yeah, do that. If that's what your players want, if they want to start at like a really we just played 4 games and we only got up to level 14 each time at highest. I want to really play something powerful. I was like, okay, sure. This game may be a little shorter, as we're gonna make sure that you get that high level play. Figure out what class did you really want to see at the very high levels, and run a game where it's just like that. Just see where it goes. Maybe you have no idea how powerful they are, and the first couple encounters they wipe out your monsters. Maybe you have no idea how powerful that level of monster is, and you wipe out half the party in the first encounter. Whatever. Play with it, have fun, make mistakes. You can usually get a pretty good feel. And with that situation, I usually aim for the little weaker and then, build it up, but it can happen. What requirements do you have for the players? Like for who the characters are? Do they already have to be a group of traveling adventurers that travel and work together, take on quests to earn some coin? You can just tell them to create characters that are a pre-existing group. That way you don't have to worry about getting them together. Or do they just have to be characters that are willing to submit to authority when drafted to an army? Because if your campaign involves getting the party together by all drafting them into the same military group, it doesn't work very well if one of them is the rogue thief who distrusts authority so much that he would sooner die than... Well then, okay. Thanks for making your character. You made a character that would sooner die than join the rest of the party. Well, you dodged the draft and are found and killed. Your character managed to do what he'd rather do. Make a new one. Just tell them from the start. If you have a certain way that you're getting them together, let them know from the beginning. It could just be, you must make a character that is willing to respond with giving aid when you see a situation that needs them. You gotta be a helpful guy so that when I give dire situation, you guys are the ones that run to help. And then that will get you together. Do that. Just let them know from the start so that they don't... These simple requirements make it easier to get the party together. They're going to make it easier for you, so of course the players want to make characters that will end on the campaign. They just might not be thinking about it if you don't tell them to. They may think making a selfish, antisocial pyromancer who just wants to watch the world burn sounds like such a fun character to play. But a selfish, antisocial pyromancer who wants to watch the world burn is not the easiest to get into a group of cooperative party members that you have for your campaign, that you need to have them all work together. That character doesn't fit with that. So while fun doesn't really work for the game, maybe save that for later. Because just let them know from the beginning, what you're going to need from them to make sure that they know you have to have this kind of character in order for your character to be involved in this campaign. Otherwise, you made a great character, sure, fine. He's just not part of the party, and he's not part of this game. He's off over there doing his burning things down. In fact, here, let me take him. He might be your next villain. But you need to make one that can join the party. And then, you sit down and create characters. This can be done a variety of ways. Especially if you have an array, or point buy, you can just let your players make their characters on their own and come to session 1 with them. I don't like that. I like to sit with my players as they make them. I really do. I like some sort of interaction with that. But that isn't always what you need to do. You can sit down as a big group, everyone together, and I'll make your characters together. Or maybe you could sit down one-on-one with each player and make a character and let them make decisions and have secrets, past things that you're going to weave into the campaign. for each character that the other players don't know of. Each person has a history, and as you're bringing them together, those are going to reveal themselves over time. Try, as you do this character creation, to learn a bit about the characters. But at the same time, don't force your players to make decisions too early. If they want to figure out most of the details about their character's personality as they go through play, let them. You gotta figure out you gotta know your class, you gotta know at least some bit about your background, you have to choose a background. But if you're not sure how this has left you, if you're not sure if the early death of your your character's sibling, in childhood, if you're not sure how that has really affected you over time, that's fine. You know it happened, and maybe as you decide what's going on with your character, you're going to find out how deep that scar has run upon them. Is it just a bit of their backstory, or is that something that they blame themselves for and can be manipulated with as they see other individuals, siblings, can that break them emotionally years later? Really is up to the player. What kind of character do they want to play? And sometimes the player wants to figure that out once they actually step into the character's shoes and start really exploring the world. So if they need a little time to figure it out, try to let them have it. Get enough detail for you to get what you need, but expect that they're not going to know the exact details of their character before they sit down and play. Play is going to figure out some of that. And most of the character creation process really is just following the guideline that you set when you made decisions about how the players would create characters. Beyond that, you get to prepare to begin the game. Once you actually have your players, and you can do this with your world building, and you can try and set it up where your players can make characters and you can start playing right away. And it, depending on how long your play sessions are going to be, that might be best. If you are going to play once a month and you're going to play, one Saturday every month and you're going to play for 8 to 10 hours, well, yeah, you better prepare first. But personally, I play usually about 2 hours. 2 hours every week. It used to be about 4. I like 2 better. I do. 2 to 3 is nice. So, some games go over. But I like to aim for 2. It's been really good for me preparing and running a game. And also for us as busy adults at this point, fitting it into our schedule. But, so I generally think of character creation as its own separate evening. Spend a couple hours, we get the characters made, and then the next week we're going to start playing, so I have time to prime. If you're going to be, aiming for a 4 or 10 hour, game the first time you meet, you're going to need some of this prepared before they make their characters. Although don't be afraid to say, okay, you're going to create characters, and then we're all going to go out to lunch. And I might be able to quiet during lunch, and I'm going to have my little notepad, and I'm just going to come up with some ideas that help involve who your characters are with what ideas I already have. And then, you come back, and so it takes up an extra hour, but you get to have fun. You get to hear the players joking about things that they're new characters that are fresh in their mind that they just made, that they're excited about. Oh, what if my character gets to do this? Well, yeah, if you want to do that, let me write that down. Because you want to listen to what your players want to do. Throughout. As you figure them out, figure out what they want to do. Because that's going to let you know how to reward the players. Is by knowing what the player wants their character to do. Because, yeah, you can reward the characters with cool experience and gear, and that's fun. But if really the player wants to see how they would take on a dragon, then making sure that you work them up to the point where they get to take on a dragon is a reward for the player. I get to see if my plan works. It's fun. But from the beginning, like I said, I consider them to be 2 separate sessions with the length of session I run. And so I can wait until after, so I've already done world building. Now I see what the characters that I'm going to throw into the world are. Now I get to prepare to begin the game. And you can just come up with a story if you want. But there isn't really a need to do so. It can be kind of dangerous to do so. Because if you come up with too much of a story and you really want to stick to it, then all of a sudden you're telling a story and you're trying to drag your players through it. That's not fun. You can just come up with a few cool places, people, etc. You can just give your players things to interact with, things to see, and then you get to look at it and find out what do the characters, as run by these players, gravitate towards. And let them sort of lead the story in the direction that they want to go. It's a lot easier, and you can give details like, okay, your characters are going to have to want to go into the Underdark. You got to go into the Underdark. That's the game I'm running. If you run out into the forest, I'm going to say, have fun out there, your character's not involved in my game. So you can tell them from the beginning that kind of thing. But more or less, okay, once they got down there, it was, well, what are they going to want to do? Where do they go? And I can push them in a direction, but there's all sorts of other paths, and if they just look at that direction and say, no, and they do an about turn and they walk away, well, then they walk away. So I want to have ideas of other things that are down there. And perhaps plan some monsters for them to fight, or loot to award them. So that's one less thing you have to come up with on the fly. But don't be afraid to make it up as you go either. Have a few encounters and things like, because it's much easier to have a balanced encounter if you're prepared for it ahead of time. It's not easy necessarily to balance on the fly, but you don't have to have every encounter balanced anyways. If you want to throw your players up against a monster that's 2 or 3 times their challenge rating every so often, and only realize that you're doing it halfway through the combat, well, you can adjust as you go. Done it. Done it plenty. Just kind of work with it. But primarily, as you prepare at this point, prepare for session 1. You can look further ahead if you want. But if you're doing so, be aware your players may never go to that. And now it depends on what you're doing. If you're saying, at some point I want the players to invade such and such bank in such and such city to have to, obtain such and such artifact. Well, that's a little detailed, and they may never go to that city. They may hear rumors about that city and the treasures within the bank there, and just say, yeah, but isn't that city where all the elves are? I hate elves. I'm never going there. And you're done. You've now put your artifact in the bank in a city the players don't ever want to go to. But if you keep things vague until you kind of know where the city is that they're going to, you can say, I want some sort of bank heist. I want that to be involved in my campaign. And that's fluid. You can move that. You can plan things or events and sort of once the players are biting on that and they're trying to break into a bank, I have planned how my bank heist encounter is going to go. I'm prepared for that. But you haven't set where it is and those kind of details, so you have it fluid. You can move it around. You can put it wherever the players end up finding themselves. And that way, they get to go where they want, but you get to have something that's ready to have exciting action. And, furthermore, if you didn't decide to tell your players to make characters that already are an adventuring party working together, your primary focus for session 1 is getting them together. How do I get this random group of crazies to work together and decide that they're going to do something as a group? You have to plan an event or catalyst to just get that story started. Working towards something. And if able, get them going by the end of the session towards a common goal or destination. Get them oh yeah, we should do that. Let's travel to that town and check this out together. Wonderful. If you can end your first game like that, you have them together and you know the town to plan. Or the road to the town that you can plan. Whatever it may be. If you can get them towards that, wonderful. You can't always get them to decide that, but if you can at least get them together, you can try and prepare what you can. Because, yeah, you just gotta... if they're not starting already at the party, you gotta start your first session with, how do I get these guys to work together? And then, at some point, you just gotta sit down and run a session. Just get the game started. It'll give you a better chance to feel out your world and how the players are enjoying it. Furthermore, it will give the players a chance to see who their characters are, nail down some details about their characters' personalities, what kind of people they are. Again, try and get the group together during that first session if they don't start out that way. And if you can get them to at least decide on a short-term goal, something that gives you something to plan for the next time, wonderful. If you can't, you're basically just going to do what you did before and try and plan for a variety of options. Either way, don't just keep planning. At a certain point, sit down, run the game, and see how it feels. It's going to make further planning and such much easier once you've actually gotten started. Then, when you're done with session 1, you have time to prep again. Prepare for the next session. The difference is, now, you can prepare based on a more solid idea of who the characters are and what your world is. And if they were in the middle of something, you can prepare for exactly what they're about to do. If you use the monsters or loot or random events or whatever you had planned to drop in where you needed it, if you used it, plan more. Re-prepare that. I find it more useful, generally, to plan out things that can just sort of be slotted in where needed. But rather than planning out an overall story. I also have players that a lot of the joy that they get in the game is when they realize they've done something I didn't expect. Which is also why I hear all sorts of Game Master advice that says, try and make it where your players think you were prepared for everything. Just sort of have that attitude of as you improvise, just you are prepared for that. That's a terrible idea for me. My players start to think that they are not ever doing something I didn't expect, then they will go out of their way to create characters that are absolutely insane in order to make sure they do so. I don't want that. I want, because that is where they get joy. My players enjoy that. Being disingenuous with them would rob them of that joy. They get a laugh when they realize they came up with something that now I gotta plan for on the fly, and I enjoy growing as a Dungeon Master and learning to be better at planning things on the fly anyways. I've started to kind of let them know, I'm at this point, half the stuff is like that. I don't try to plan a full story for y'all anymore. I see what you want to do. It's better for me to put my dedicated time towards that than trying to come up with something that you're going to ignore anyways. They get a kick out of it. So, if they're enjoying it, then that works. I don't gotta try and lie to them. But yeah. It's also, so if you have players like that, it's hard to force that story on them anyways. You can. You can take a little bit of narrative control, and you can push them to the next bit of story if you need to. It is removing some of their free will, and there's a big downside to that. It's not that it's never acceptable to do so. Because there are times where you have to, especially be very useful, right as you're starting the game, and just, if you have to push them together. But just be very careful with it. And if you can avoid it, do. The players are going to be happier if they feel like they're completely controlling their characters. They enjoy that more. So unless, if you have to push the story on, and you can also do it with just sort of almost stopping the nerve and saying, dude, we're not getting anywhere until your character decides to do this. Is there some sort of enticement I need to give your character to get them there? Or do I just gotta say they go? Be honest with them. Hopefully you're playing with friends. I play with friends. I love it. They're the best friends. Are the friends that I've slain dragons with. technically I've often been the dragon being slain, but it's fine, I love them anyways. So, be honest with them. Hopefully they're honest with you. Regardless of what exactly you plan for, at that point, you just kind of keep going, session by session. You run your session 2, you prepare for your next session. Run your session 3, prepare for your next session. And you just sort of figure out, between each game, what you need to have for the next game. Sometimes, you're going to prepare a whole bunch of stuff for a session, and you're only going to use a little bit of it. And so you're already going to have the next session planned. So you don't really have to prepare for that. That's when I decide, okay, that time that I would normally have used, I'm going to create a few weird things just as details. Like, I had a day like that, and I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to come up with a notebook sheet of, like, magical drugs that are somewhere in this world. And if it comes up, it comes up. If not, then it doesn't. Either way is fine. I just had extra time to prepare, and I'd already had what I needed. Let's just come up with a cool, basically, come up with a sheet of, here is something that is just, I never would have, taken the time to do, except I had this extra time. Come up with something weird. Something that might be useful, that can eat up a lot of time, and you don't want to have to do it if it's going to, if you're going to not be able to prepare the rest of a session. But if you have the extra time, it's cool to be able to have it ready for when you do need it. And like that was something I'm like, if I don't use it this game, I can use it in another, or wherever. And yeah, so you just sort of plan each session as you go, and as you find things that you're not good at improvising, prepare those. You may have been running games for a long time, and you know that. If you're just new to it, try and figure out, I have trouble coming up with this on the fly, and have that prepared. I did that with Arcane Drugs, but if you find that you have a hard time coming up with names that feel like they fit the world that you're running, then prepare a list of names for each culture or whatever you need. Just have like a sheet or a few sheets with names that you need, so that you can just grab those as you go. And if you do like one name per line, you can even add a dash after it and write a few details when you turn it into an NPC. If you have trouble coming up with food, a list of food and drink that's available when your players go to a tavern, and you want that level of detail. You want to actually roleplay that interaction at the tavern as the barkeep comes up and says, what do we have? What do you have? We have poached eggs, and we have leg of lamb, and meat, and whatever it may be. If you have trouble just coming up with that on the fly, come up with a list when you have some spare time, and just have, here is a list of food items, and you can give them each prices. Of course, you can see a list of, here is a meal cost in the player's handbook, but you can kind of come, if you choose to have these things that would be able to keep for you, sure, it still feeds your character, but because you're choosing to eat, lean, you can, save a little, a couple copper here, whereas if you want to get something fancy, it's a little more, so you can have things be a little bit varied in price, and just have that sort of ready and on a sheet, ready to pull out. They go to an inn, and you just sort of say, this inn has these 4 things, and you sort of list them off as the barkeep is sort of washing things down, and just have it ready. Whatever you're having trouble coming up with on the fly, prepare. And you'll kind of get used to that as you figure out what you can and can't come up with easily. And if you keep trying, you can expand the things that you are better at coming up with. It's a skill that you can develop. And so at that point, you're pretty much just, again, doing that back and forth. Prepare, run a session. Prepare, run a session. But there are other bits of detail that while I'm here talking about running a game, I thought would be worthwhile to at least give some advice. I think I said it, but again, try to listen to what your players want. Don't just give them whatever they want. But you can find things that would feel, to the player, like worthwhile rewards that you might not have thought of. And things that are interesting hooks for them. Like, oh, wait, maybe there's what kind of magic item is supposed to be lost in that dungeon? Well, yeah, then I do want to explore that. That's exactly what I would love to have. Really, you're just going with what they wanted. You just got to pay attention to what the players want. And remember, you have endless control. But your job is to create a story, world, game, whatever it may be, that everyone else enjoys. That they enjoy as well, but you're trying to... I often say, if my players have fun, then I have fun. My fun is knowing that my friends have had a good evening. That's my goal. That's what I am there to do. That is what I put hours of prep in, is to make sure that my players have a good time. And I've had comments from them that tear me up, like, a buddy that, sort of said, comments about how I just don't give, like, the magic items that, he wishes he get. And I'm like, I try. And it tears me up, to which he then, like, stops me. He's like, don't feel bad about it. I'm not supposed to just get everything I want. I have an amazing time, and it's good. It's just like, but I'm not just having every magic item. And I'm like, but it wouldn't make sense to. And he understands it, but it's sort of, they can tear me up by just sort of making offhand comments. I've had the same thing with the level of advancement. When a friend is sort of dissatisfied with it, and I'm like, okay, what can I do? To which he'll then replies like, you could give us 2 levels every session, and I'd want more. You don't have to worry. So it's you don't have to do exactly what they want. They're not expecting you to throw every magic item in the game at them at 2nd level and make sure that they're 3rd level by the second game, session. They're not expecting that. They may talk a little bit like, "Oh, I'd love that." That's not what they're expecting. You just got to make sure they have fun and that they're enjoying the time that they're spending. As much time as you're spending, they're also, they're still spending a couple hours just sort of playing around in the world that you've come up with in your head. Make sure they have fun doing it. Another crucial piece of advice that it's taken me a while to figure out, and sometimes in the middle of a moment I forget, and then when it happens I'm like, oh yeah. If a character failing at something would stop your story from progressing, then don't ask them to make a check to succeed at it. They succeed. You can just let them succeed at something. If finding some sort of clue is the only way that your story progresses, then you don't say, okay, who can make a DC 15 investigation check? Everyone rolls. Highest is, 7. You sit there dumbfounded. You don't find it. Well, I guess this plot line is scrapped. No. You go with whatever player has the highest passive perception, or perhaps whatever player says, oh, I just check around the desk. Well, it's under the desk. Okay, you're checking. I'm just going to assume you checked the right spot. Let them find it. They find what they need to find. If it is needed for the story to continue, you don't make them roll. You can choose whoever has the best passive perception, which, even if that would be lower than you would normally make the check, if they gotta find it, they gotta find it. You don't just let your game end because they rolled poorly. Dice aren't always nice. Dice can be very cruel. And when the dice are cruel to your players, that can mess up your game too. So just don't rely on someone having to to roll well. And another last thing is when you improvise things, just sitting at the table and you improvise something, which you need to do, is good to do, it's fun to do once it's no longer scary for you to have to come up with something on the fly. It's fun to just sort of make up those kind of details as you go. But when you improvise things on the spot while running a game, try to think about things that you need to take notes on. If you give names or descriptions of things or people, and you think your players are going to have their characters return to that, you may want to jot a note or two down to remind yourself of those details later on. If you want to be able to take your notes later on, you can always record all your sessions. It's incredibly useful if you need to remember the accent that you gave a character or whatever it may be. I'll just say that's one thing. However, if you record them and put them online, you also feel a little more need to come up with the same choices each time, which isn't always as easy. If it's just your players sitting there live, of course, you're going to have a lot more leeway. You may describe your gnome bank as being carved out of a deep black marble, but 7 sessions later, the next time they return there, you've forgotten, and you say you walk into the carved white marble bank, and that's a complete different description. And if you're recording it and putting it online, then yeah, someone could say, hey, that was black marble before, why is it white marble now? And they can notice, but your players that are now 2 months down the road, unless they jotted it down, in which case they say, wasn't it like, huh? Oh yeah, and you just agree with them. That's fine. My bad. You're human, you're allowed to be human. But unless they notice right on the spot, then they didn't notice. They're not going to catch it. They also just remembered, oh yeah, the gnome's got a marble bank. It's fine. But to some extent, try to jot down some notes to just sort of keep internal consistency. It's helpful, it's nice. You know, keep notes for yourself. And yeah, that's an overview of creating and running a campaign. If you have questions about running a campaign or want more details, either details about something that I've talked about here, like, okay, you said this, but can you go into more detail about that? Or if it's just, hey, you didn't discuss such and such topic, let me know down below in the comments. Ask, please. This is definitely an overview of the concept of creating and running a campaign. But if I'm going to do a follow-up at some point, I'd like to know more specifically what questions you'd like answered, what subjects you'd like me to go over with it, in it. I'd be happy to sit down and follow up on this with some more. But I want to know that I'm gonna want to know more specific, because this was just sort of the, I was asking how do you create and run a campaign? I'm like, okay, that's a broad subject. There's a lot of things down there. And I was sort of, but you know what? Sure, let's go over it. Let's just do an overview, and so an overview is what I did. But yeah, so if you have more specific questions or need more details, let me know, and at some point, if I do get a handful of questions, I'll certainly follow up on this with something else. Otherwise, feel free to subscribe to my channel, like the video, all that fun YouTube stuff that helps my channel grow, and for me to, my channel to do better, it makes me happy. I enjoy doing this. I do unboxings, which some of them are just, I unbox a board game and you see the board game. But I also have, unboxings of like Pathfinder Flipmat, where I aim to go through and actually talk about how I might use it in the game. Like, okay, this is designed in this asylum, but I could also see using this as a forlorn fortress on a mountainside. I'll discuss that. And I also have lots of actual plays. As I do run games with my friends, I record those and I upload them up here for you to watch. Whether just because, it's fun to watch people play D&D in your downtime, or because it's inspirational to do so for your own games, getting ideas. Both of those are very true. With session 2, I finally started watching Critical Role, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's why people watch this. Because, it's the kind of thing, like, I enjoy running the games, and I enjoy doing this, so I was like, yeah, sure, let's record my games. People like that. Finally watching one, I'm like, I get it. Because at first it was like, okay, yeah, it's cool entertainment. And I knew that. But it's also so much inspiration to be pulled from it. Feel free to rip off whatever ideas I have through watching campaigns I run as well. I got no claim to it. If you're just wanting to have fun with your buddies, rip off whatever you want, man. Right? Why would I? We're all playing games. We're all having fun. But yeah, so subscribe to my channel. Check out other things. Thank you for watching this. Have a wonderful day.